Has there ever been a book or a show or a piece of media that you've always seen on the shelf but never picked up? It's not that you weren't interested in it, just that when it came time to decide what you were going to check out or purchase or spend your time with, that work never made the cut, even if it was always a candidate. The years pass, time goes on, but you still remember that work. It never really left your mind because there was still something about it that intrigued you. And even if you've moved to a different town, or that old shop is no longer standing, or the library got rid of the work in the latest shuffle, you're still curious. Now finally curious enough to make the effort and track the work down. Orphen is that work for me. I first became aware of it over a decade ago, but never got around to watching it until recently with the COVID-induced media hunger that took hold of us all during this past year. Unlike Shakugan no Shana though, which was kept in my mind through its being referenced in other works I'd seen, Orphen comes from that era of 90s fantasy anime, like Record of Lodoss War, and stayed in my mind simply because it looked interesting. Like a more serious Slayers, which I loved as a teen. So, after finally tracking Orphen down and giving it a watch, was it worth the wait? Well, first let's ask, what is Orphen? Orphen is a 1998 TV adaptation of the Sorceress Stabber Orphen series of light novels. It tells the story of Orphen, a rebellious wizard on a mission to restore his loved one Ozzy, who was transformed into a dragon by the mystic sword of Baltanders. No, not Baldanders, Baltanders. Joining him on this mission is his apprentice Magic, spelled with a J, and his companion Cleo, spelled with a... Anyways, Orphen and Ozzy were once sorcerers at the Tower of Fang, but after Ozzy's transformation, the Tower decided the best course of action was to kill her, to halt her rampage across the land permanently. Orphen, though, still has faith that Ozzy can be returned to humanity, and will stop at nothing to make this happen. But alongside the most powerful group of sorcerers in the world, Orphen must contend with Vulcan and Dorton, two bumbling troll brothers who have made off with the Sword of Baltanders, which he needs to bring Ozzy back. How does the world of Orphen work? Just as many fantasy books exist in the standard medieval European setting, so too do many fantasy anime exist in the standard anime fantasy setting. This is a place that bears a vague resemblance to Europe in that everyone has European-esque names and phenotypes, but which has social orders and modern conveniences just like in contemporary Japan. A case in point, Orphen has a name that is not Japanese, and he travels by horse and wagon through little medieval villages, but in these little villages you can find things like Japanese cream sodas, electric lights, and even guns!
Let me ask you something, kid. Which is faster, your magic or my bullets? Let's find out.
Did you hear that? It sounded like a gunshot.
I really hate to break it to you, genius, but I think we've got a few troubles of our own right here, don't you?
In other words, the world makes no real sense when you stop to think about it, but it looks cool and it provides a setting for our characters to shine. How brightly do they shine? Well, easily the greatest strength of Orphen is its cast. If you looked at Orphen with his fine leather jacket and his cocky grin and were reminded of the Ninth Doctor, you wouldn't be too far off, actually. Orphen is someone with scars. He's had something of a tough life and broke away from his order of powerful wizards because he felt that they were too cold and callous. He's someone who likes to pretend that he doesn't care and is above it all, but who is ultimately a deeply compassionate individual who is always willing to help whenever and however he can. At the same time, though, he likes to keep people at a distance, and it's through his interaction with Magic and Cleo that he learns to be vulnerable again. Magic and Cleo are Orphen's companions, and while they don't do much besides ask questions and act as audience surrogates, like all companions in Doctor Who, they work best when they play against Orphen. Something unlike Doctor Who, though, is the presence of Vulcan and Dorton. I'm still not quite sure just what they're supposed to be. Wikipedia refers to them as dwarves, but the show itself uses the word trolls to describe them, and this is never challenged. Also, the original Japanese is Chijin, which literally translates to Earth people, so... I don't know, man. What is certain, though, is that typical rules of physics don't seem to apply to them. And while other characters face more or less real-world injuries when beaten up, the two trolls operate under laws more akin to Looney Tunes, hence their main role as comic relief. Vulcan and Dorton are a villainous archetype that you see very often in Japanese media, but not so frequently in Western works, and certainly not in Doctor Who. Like Team Rocket and Pokemon, they are an ineffectual duo of villains who appear in every episode, but don't really do much in said episodes besides get beaten up and blasted off again. So if I were to sum up the main appeal of Orphen, I think the best description would be Doctor Who versus Team Rocket. If you go in expecting that and not much else, then I think you'll walk away pretty satisfied. However, this isn't to say that Orphen isn't capable of depth. One aspect of the world which I have to discuss is in how it handles transgenderism. Now, I should point out that how transgenderism is conceived in a place like America is different from a place like Japan. And while I'm afraid I'm no expert on trans issues, I do know that certain pieces of Japanese media, like Tokyo Godfathers or Persona 4, can unintentionally come across as offensive or transphobic to Western audiences, because of this difference in conception. However, in the case of Orphen, I think I can say without fear of contradiction that the show demonstrates an example of transgenderism that both Japanese and Western audiences would be on the same page with. How does it handle it? Well, to explain that, I will have to get into some minor spoilers, so if you want none of that, you can skip to this timestamp. For those of you who want to press on, though, midway through the show, Orphen and the gang stop in a city to consult Orphen's old partner, Stephanie, who is an expert on ancient runes. The adventure proceeds as you would expect until it is revealed at the end that Stephanie used to be Steven. It isn't treated as a big reveal, simply something Orphen mentions to Magic and Cleo after the day has been saved and before they set out on the next adventure. But what is surprising is how Orphen and the narrative fully support Stephanie's transition. While Stephanie is taller and deeper voiced than the average woman, Orphen shuts down any and all comments about her being a man. Stephanie used to be Steven, but she's Stephanie now, and that's that. Not only that, but Magic is allowed to be attracted to Stephanie without anyone making a gay joke. And by the end of the anime, Stephanie is happily married to the man that she loves, leading a content and fulfilled life. I'll admit, I'm not that familiar with trans media or how this sort of thing would be perceived by the average trans person. But personally, I really like how Stephanie is portrayed, and I like how Orphen doesn't allow his friend to be misgendered. I think the best way to describe how her transition is presented is something like this.
Have you ever had a crappy job that just really wears you down? And then one day, you pluck up the courage to quit that crappy job. And it's rough for a while, you try a few different things, but eventually you get a new job where you're happy and fulfilled, and they work you hard, but it's okay. And it doesn't solve all your problems overnight, but you start to sleep a little bit better. Your mental health starts to improve. The people who love you say, wow, you really seem like you're in a much better place. I'm really happy for you. Your relationships start clicking again. And then one day, you hear that same song on the radio and you go, you know what? I actually kind of like this. That's what this is like. And it's incredible. I never thought that I could be so simply happy. It's amazing.
But then, near the end, when Orphen and the gang see Stephanie and her boyfriend together, Orphen suddenly says that they're both guys. Somehow that was even more painful than if the show had treated Stephanie as a joke from the beginning. Now, a charitable interpretation of that scene is to take into account the fact that when Orphen makes the comment, he is in a bad place, to the point where everyone around him comments on just how sullen and dour he is. But even taking that into account, I think this illustrates in microcosm the main problem with the show, and the answer to the question, what does Orphen have to say? Okay, I was able to talk about Stephanie with only minor spoilers, but for this I'm gonna have to delve more deeply. Not only into spoilers, but also into some pretty heavy topics like abuse. I've done my best to address these issues as lightly as I can, but if you want to avoid them altogether, feel free to skip here. Oh yeah, and for those of you who are now thinking, wait, did I just click on the previous timestamp? only to be presented with another timestamp to skip to? Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, so as I stated earlier, the main driving force behind the story of Orphen is Orphen's desire to turn Osley back to a human. When we first learn of this desire, we only know Osley as a giant dragon. We have no information on what she was like pre-transformation besides Orphen's word, and so when we hear him talk about her in such adoring, tender terms, we, and Orphen's companions, all assume that Osley was Orphen's lover. But then we get our first flashback of Orphen and Osley, and we notice that Osley is quite a bit older than Orphen. While the exact age difference is never directly stated in the series, it's clear that such a difference is present and significant. Not only that, but it later turns out that Osley's relation to Orphen was more as a surrogate mother than a lover. And yet, despite this, Osley is shown as not being above using her sexuality to manipulate Orphen.
It would be our little secret, just between us.
From that point on, there is a disconnect between Orphen's subjective descriptions and the objective images we see of Orphen and Osley together. While Orphen still talks about Osley in glowing terms, what we see of her paints a very different picture. The image we see of Osley is one of a power-hungry individual, willing to use Orphen for her own ends precisely because he is enamored with her, and demonstrating brief flashes of something even darker lurking in her psyche. Orphen himself remarks on noticing these flashes of darkness, moments when a capacity for violence or megalomania would break through even his rose-colored lenses. But immediately after bringing this up, Orphen mentions how he would always ignore these moments, disregarding them as unimportant or not reflective of the Osley that he knew. By the time we reach the last third of the story, the Tower of Fang sorcerer known as Childman, who was the teacher of both Orphen and Osley and is now in charge of taking Osley down, seems a lot more sympathetic than the person Orphen makes him out to be. And Childman's apprentice even shows up from time to time to convince Orphen that he's got Childman all wrong. By the end of the story, everyone around Orphen is telling him that Osley is not a good person, and that continuing this single-minded devotion to her will only lead to tragedy for him. But then, we get to the big reveal in the final few episodes. See, it turns out that the sole reason Osley began her quest for eternal power and the destruction of the Tower of Fang is that ever since she first came to the tower as a child, she has always been in love with Childman. She knew about Orphen's feelings for her, but she didn't care about them, except for when she could use them for her own ends. When she turned 17 and confessed to Childman, though, he turned her down, saying that she was still too young and should devote herself to her studies. And so, entirely because of that, Osley swore to destroy Childman and the whole Tower of Fang, turning into the dragon as part of a botched bid for more power. But it's okay, because you see, after Osley turned into a dragon and went on a rampage, Childman realized his mistake and swore to turn Osley back into a human, after which he would marry her. So all this time, Orphen and Childman have been working towards the same goal because they both love Osley. And Osley is so touched by this that she allows herself to be transformed back into a human. By story's end, Orphen has been proven completely right about everything, and Osley is living a happy life now that she is pregnant with Childman's child and ready to fulfill her duties as a wife and mother. Keep in mind, Osley killed a lot of people while she was a dragon, and she did so fully cognizant and aware of what she was doing because her mind was still fully intact in that dragon body. But it's okay. She doesn't have to face any consequences or even a call-out because Orphen's love has redeemed her. So, the message of Orphen becomes this. If you're in a relationship that's really draining you, where you have to put in all the effort while the other person does nothing but take and take and take, you shouldn't worry about it. No matter what they do to you, any problems in the relationship can be attributed to the fact that you simply don't love them enough. If you only love them even more, give them even more than what they're already taking, that will fix everything. It's your fault the relationship isn't working and your responsibility to fix it. Maybe your friends all say that the relationship is toxic, but they're wrong. They simply don't appreciate everything your partner does for you. And you don't either if you're doubting things like you are now. Don't be so selfish. Just sacrifice even more for them. Devote even more of your time and your energy and your life to them, and you'll be alright. After all, that's what love is, isn't it? Thanks, but no thanks. Final verdict. I must confess, the most I have seen of the Game of Thrones TV show has been the stray episode or occasional clip. I honestly don't know what it was like to devote 8 years of my life to this show only for the ending to screw me over because I watched it all happen from the sidelines. But having now finished Orphen, I think I can venture a guess as to what the experience was like. Maybe in the original novels or the 2019 remake things are different, but for this series, I have to give it a 4 out of 10. I cannot believe just how badly the show bungles its ending. When Orphen is a quirky, character-driven comedy, it is truly enjoyable. But when it tries to rise any higher than that, like Icarus, it utterly fails. It had such potential. It could have been so much better than it was, but in the end, it only leaves me truly disappointed. So for now, I'm Marco King, signing off, and I hope you liked this video. If you did, and you'd like to see me make more, please leave a like or comment down below, share my video via Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or other means, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you all, and I will see you in the next one.